Thank you, Mr. Steenhuisen, and we greatly appreciate you being here with us. But I want to take you back to 2019, where the DA had quite a mass exodus of black leaders, with all basically singing the same tune, singing the same chorus around race being part and parcel, in fact, a significant part of the reasons why they left. Has the party really done some introspection and looked at and investigated whether there is an issue around race that should be focused on?
Well, no, there's no race problem in the DA at all. And if there was, we certainly wouldn't be attracting the type of talent that we have over the years. And we certainly would not be sitting with the most diverse caucus. And we certainly wouldn't be attracting a third of our votes from black South Africans. And I think that often what happens is the DA becomes the primary focus for people coming and going. But that same attention is not given to other parties. And I think it's unfair. I also think people need to be interrogated more vigorously about why they really leave. And often it's not the case that they say race is a very easy way to justify your departure. Some people have lost congresses. Some people have not got their way in the party. Some people have had to take accountability for election results. So I think that there is an unfair focus on people coming and going in the DA. It's a natural thing in politics to have people coming and going in political parties. The EFF have changed 75% of their MPs over the last 5 years. No one's talking about a purge there. People like Bongani Beloy and others, Moseki, leave Action South Africa. It doesn't even register on the meter. There are people leaving the ANC in droves to join the MK party. No one's asking them what the problem is. They've got a race problem in their party. The DA stands true to its values and principles. And yes, after 2019, we have unashamedly moved away from an ANC-light direction, where the DA went into that election trying to be everything to everybody. And if people were more comfortable in an ANC-light environment, well, they're going to be less comfortable in us going back to our core values and principles. So I'm sure some people have left because they want to find a home that is more ANC-light, and that's not going to be the DA. The DA is going to be standing firm on its own values and principles and standing on its own program of action, and is going to be unashamed about who we are and what we're about in the country. And there will be people who like that and join us. There will be people who don't like it and they go other places. But that's the beauty of politics, freedom of association. You're free to join the organization that you feel is best.
I want to talk about the DA that because you've just touched on the DA light.
ANC light.
ANC light, and you wanting to move away from that and go back to its core values. What does that mean exactly? Because a lot has been said around the DA regressing back to its constituencies, which were the white constituencies, which were their core voters were not necessarily the black voters. Can you touch on that?
Well, that's simply not true, because if the DA had a core electorate of white voters only, we'd be sitting at 8% in the polls. The DA is sitting above 20%. And it clearly is a result of the fact of us being able to get votes from across the spectrum. And our core voters are a third black, a third white, and a third Indian and coloured. The only party that's able to attract people from different races to vote for us. If you look at the SRF's polling that they did into party political support, the DA is the only party that's drawing from a multiracial electorate. The parties to the left and right of us are drawing from virtually monochromatic. So the DA is certainly not. You'd be crazy to go back to a whites-only core constituency, because then you'd be getting 7% of the vote. And that would be a very silly political strategy, particularly in an election where you're wanting to grow. The DA does best when it stands up for its values and principles. It carries those values and principles into government, and it translates those values and principles into policies that deliver jobs, that deliver houses, that deliver safety to communities, that deliver water and electricity, and ensure that people have a better chance of building a better future for themselves. That's where the DA is the strongest. The DA is at its weakest when it's trying to emulate the ANC, when it's going all floppy on BEE, when it's going all floppy on a variety of other issues. Because people then look at the DA, black, white, Indian and coloured, and say, well, I don't know what these people stand for. What are they fighting for? And that's what happened in 2019. The party was pulled in a direction where it was trying to be everything to everybody and ended up being, losing votes precisely because of that. Now the DA, from 2019 to now, despite the fact that News 24 and others said the DA's died in 2019, here we are, back going into this election with no serious analyst, no serious poll, and no serious political pundit that says the DA is not going to be a major part in the post-29 May environment. That's a long way to come for a party that was called dead in 2019.
Now, you touched on the SRF poll, and just yesterday there was actually a poll which said that you are going to be weakened in the Western Cape, which is a SRF poll. What is your reaction to
the margin of error of 3%? I think that we'll be well comfortable in the Western Cape. Certainly, our internal polling has us retaining the Western Cape with an increased majority, and I'm sure that will be the case. This is a province, remember. It hasn't spoken about creating jobs. It created 380,000 jobs in the last year alone. It hasn't spoken about keeping people safe. It's deployed 1,000 police officers onto the street and it's reduced priority crime in hotspot areas 14% year on year. This is a government that's delivering on our pledges to end load shedding and water shedding. So I think the people of the Western Cape, when they go into those voting booths, are going to be mindful of that fact. So that poll still had us above 50%, didn't say have us below 50%. And I think that within a 3% margin of error, we'll be more than comfortable in the Western Cape. Of course, I'd love to tell every voter we're going to lose the Western Cape because I want them to come out and vote like their future depends on it, because it does. But I certainly believe that that poll, unlike the ANC, which is way below 50% in the polling, had us above 50% with the majority. So, I'm very confident we will retain the Western Cape as the DA, and that there won't be a coalition in the Western Cape. It'll be a DA government.
I want to touch on the race matter just one last time, and speak to you and ask you around the Federal Council Chair, Ms. Helen Zille, and there was an investigation around her. I think it was 2019 or during that time. I think it was Musi Maimane's time when there was an investigation over her tweets. What happened to that investigation? And do you agree with the assertions that she made at that time, which she seems to stand by?
Well, it was way before my time. I wasn't the leader of the party then. You'd have to ask Mr. Maimane that. I'm also not Helen Zille's keeper. If people want to know, about her tweet, they must ask her about it. I have been very clear, though, that I think Twitter is a dangerous place for politicians to be. And I think that people like Helen make an enormous contribution to the party, but that I think our time is better spent on the ground with voters rather than wasting time on Twitter, because that is where you really move the needle in that regard. But I can't account for investigations initiated by Mr. Maimane when he was the leader. I can only account for investigations and party initiatives since I've been the leader. And you'd have to ask him what happened with that. I'm not a member of the FLC. I wasn't the leader of the party at the time, nor was I the chair of Federal Council at the time. So I wouldn't be able to answer to you what happened. But I'm sure that if you chat to someone who was in leadership at that time, they'd be able to show you.
But do you agree with her assertions?
With what assertions?
With her assertions on race, or with her assertions on
but
apartheid.
What are her assertions on race?
She
what
said when it came to apartheid, she said that there were systems in apartheid which were much better than they are now. Do you agree with that?
So Mr. Mashaba said yesterday that it was easier to do business under apartheid than it is now. I don't see the same reaction from the media there. I disagreed with the comment at the time. As I said, I don't believe that Twitter is a good place for people to be. That I believe in people's right to express themselves and to be able to say things that are on their mind. I don't believe in censoring people, and then people must take responsibility. They must take the responsibility for what they say. I can't take responsibility for what somebody else tweets. I can only take responsibility for what I say and what I tweet. And I think it's unfair to try and hold me accountable for something that somebody else has tweeted and said.
The cadre deployment records, the court found against you, in that the court found that there was actually nothing wrong with cadre deployment policy of the ANC, and that every political party has a right to influence the direction of public servants. And this was key part of your strategy going into the elections, correct me if I'm wrong. Do you think you missed the mark there?
No, not at all. And I think you're conflating two cases.
Okay.
The cadre deployment records case we won. We've got access to the records. We were in court again last Tuesday because we believe the ANC has behaved in a contemptuous way and have not provided the records as they should have. In relation to the case, we are appealing it. We believe the judgment is wrong. We respect the court's right to make a judgment. We believe it is a wrong assessment. The court seemed to be labouring under the impression that there's a Chinese wall between the party and the state. I think the subsequent release of the records shows that that doesn't exist, and that wall was fundamentally pierced, where you had cadre deployment committees, you had cadre deployment WhatsApp groups, you had an Excel spreadsheet based on party loyalty about where people were to be deployed. I think the judgment is one in error, and one I think that we will win on appeal, which is why we're taking it on appeal. And I am very sure that, like in Kandla and like the spy tapes and all that, this matter will end up in the Constitutional Court because it is a constitutional point that we are taking. And I don't think any competent court can come to the conclusion that parties should just be allowed to deploy whoever they want into government. I think it can. We've seen the devastating effect it's had on hollowing out state-owned enterprises, on rendering service delivery poor, making sure that money is stolen in large amounts. And I don't think that any constitutional court could come to a different finding. The Chief Justice himself at the Zondo Commission said that he believes it is unconstitutional and should be outlawed. I agree with him, and we will continue with this case because we believe that at the end of the day, we will prevail in this matter and end cadre deployment forever. For no matter which party is going to be in charge, whether it's the MPC, whether it's the DA, whether it's the IFP or the ANC, we need to end cadre deployment forever so we can build a capable civil service that can deliver to the people of South Africa.
Let's go into these coalitions. Let's talk about the multi-party charter, as well as some other coalitions. There's a lot of talk around the MK party, Jacob Zuma's MK party. More especially, polls suggest that it is going to make inroads in KwaZulu-Natal and possibly nationally as well. Would that now provide space for you as the DA to include it either in the multi-party charter or to have a coalition with the MK party?
Well, it's a very difficult question to ask because I don't know what they stand for. They've got no published policies. I haven't seen a constitution. I haven't seen a values and principles document. And we've been very clear from the beginning of the multi-party charter that we want people who share the values and principles of non-racialism, respect for the rule of law and the Constitution, a social market economy that treats business and the private sector as partners in the growth agenda, a capable state free of cadre deployment, and a unwavering focus on beating poverty. Those are the principles that people join the multi-party charter. We haven't seen MK's policy documents. I haven't seen any of their documentation. They've made no application to join the multi-party charter. But I would imagine if they're espousing the old radical economic transformation that we saw being sprouted by Mr. Zuma before he left the ANC, that there would be an unlikely fit with building a capable state, respecting the rule of law and the Constitution, which Mr. Zuma has repeatedly violated. I think it would be a difficult task. I do think the MK are going to be a player in this election. I think there's a very good possibility they will be the third largest party in the country after the election. They certainly are doing incredibly well in KwaZulu-Natal. To get 19 and then 28% in by-elections shows that they are eating into the ANC, they are eating into the EFF, and they are doing a bit of peripheral eating into the IFP. They are making ground there, and I think that they're going to be an electoral force in this election. but nobody knows what they stand for yet.
And if it does come, because the MK party does intend on having their manifesto launch, I think, early on in April, and if it does come to that the MK party does have policies which you agree with Jacob Zuma as the head of that political party, whether by de facto or not, is this still a party that you would consider, given your strong stance around Mr. Jacob Zuma himself, outside of the ANC?
Yeah. But remember, it's an NPC decision, not a DA decision. I would be unhappy with it, because I think Mr. Zuma himself has violated the Constitution and has snubbed his nose at the rule of law, which is why he was sent to prison in the first place, because he didn't respect the courts. And I think his behavior shows that he is not interested in upholding the rule of law and defending the Constitution. That being said, they would have to make an application. We would obviously assess it. We recently had an application by the referendum party, and they were overwhelmingly rejected by the charter members, because we didn't feel there was a values and principles fit. And we will judge any party that wants to join us based on that basis.
I want to talk about your recent assertions, which were trending this weekend, around spoiler parties and fragmenting votes. This is the same kind of assertions you made, I think, in 2019, 2021, where the DA was talking about wasted votes. And that agitated some of your allies. Are you not concerned that it is antagonizing to your allies that you speak of spoiler votes and them fragmenting the vote, given that you want to enter into a coalition with them to unseat the ANC?
Well, I wasn't referring to my allies in the MPC, and I was very clear about that. I specifically said Rise Mzansi in the Biz News interview, if that's what you're referring to. Because Rise Mzansi have come out and said that their mission in the Western Cape is to remove the DA and remove its majority. And I think that's counterproductive. Surely if you're working to unseat the ANC, that should be the focus. Why would you want to unseat a government that's delivering? Why would you want to unseat a government that's creating jobs? And why would you want to take aim at an opposition party already?
But
why
you've done the same.
But why do you want to be in opposition to the opposition?
But so one would say that you have done the same. You've called the EFF your enemy number one.
But they're not in
focused on
government.
the
They're not in government. They're not in government. I haven't said we're going to remove an EFF government from Limpopo. They're not in government. We already control the Western Cape. Why would an opposition party, who ostensibly tries to portray itself as wanting to be part of saving South Africa, want to take aim at an opposition party to unseat them in the Western Cape, where we're already in control? They should be focusing on trying to win seats in other areas. I think voters are going to have to ask themselves a very important question in this election, and that is, why are these parties not part of the multi-party charter? The multi-party charter is South Africa's best hope of being able to unseat the ANC. Why are these parties taking pot shots at parties in the MPC rather than taking the fight to the ANC? Doesn't make sense to me. And voters need to be careful in this election, because if you look at what happened in places like Knysna, if you look at what places that happened in Joburg, when people backed these one-man band popcorn parties, they came back to bite them, because all it did was open the back door for the ANC, the EFF and the PA to get in. And the results in Knysna today, the results in Joburg today, the results in Beaufort West are there for all to see. Poor government, not delivering, corruption and maladministration, taps running dry, no electricity. People need to vote for parties in the multi-party charter that are working together to be able to achieve a common set of objectives and to unseat the ANC. You shouldn't be taking pot shots at parties in the multi-party charter, because let's say Mr. Zibi now says he wants to be the president, and I think Mr. Maimani said he wants to be the president as well. Well, how are you going to be the president with 3 seats in parliament? You're going to have to work with other people. And I don't think it's a very good opening line to come out and say, well, we're going to attack you and then expect you to work with us afterwards. That's not how it works in politics. I'm happy. I trust the parties in the multi-party charter. We're working well together as parties, and I think voters should be very suspicious of parties that are not wanting to be part of the single biggest initiative to unseat the ANC and the best electoral chance we've had in 30 years. Instead of undermining it, they should be working with us to be able to bring the ANC below 50%.
I want to play the devil's advocate and say that the DA is in government in the Western Cape and should be open to scrutiny, and everyone should be contesting, and rightfully so. They have every right to contest the DA in that particular province. So why not give them that chance?
They've got the right to contest, but then they must also, we've got the right to squeeze them, which is exactly what I'm doing. Saying I'm putting the pressure back on them. Saying you've got the right to say it, but I've got the right to call you out on it as well. And to show the folly of what you're trying to do. You're not weakening the ANC by weakening the DA, you're weakening the opposition. And in this environment, I think it's the most foolhardy thing that you can do. But yeah, this is where I agree with their posters. I think they do need new leaders.
I want to talk about what Mr. Groenewald said last year around the multi-party charter having a black leader as its presidential candidate, and that the country at this moment is not ready for a white leader. Would you be open to that as the DA? You've said we all know that the DA is a party that believes in diversity and multiracialism, but is it a point right now? Does the country really effectively, is it ready for a white leader such as John Steenhuisen?
Was America ready for Barack Obama? Was the UK ready for Rishi Sunak? They both come from minority groupings in their countries, and I think both have performed admirably, particularly Mr. Obama. But I have been very clear from the beginning that this is not, the multi-party charter is not a John Steenhuisen for president campaign. It is a campaign designed to be able to bring the ANC below 50% and put in place a new government. And that's precisely why built in to the multi-party charter agreement is the agreement that the largest party is not necessarily the presidential candidate, because it's leaving space open for the charter to be able to decide when the time comes to put up a presidential candidate who the best person would be for the job, and to be able to make that decision. And I think it showed maturity on behalf of the DA. It showed that we're not the big brother that some people like to portray us as. We want the best for South Africa. And if there is a candidate to do a better job as president than me, I'm happy to stand aside and let them do the job. But that must be a matter for the MPC to decide. It shouldn't be a matter for individual members of the MPC to decide.
Are you happy for Herman Mashaba presidency?
Well, we'd have to discuss that when it happens. We'll have to look at who's got the best opportunity to form a government, who has the trust of the most people within the multi-party charter, and who has the ability to be able to lead. And that would be a decision for the multi-party charter. It could well be somebody who we don't even know right now. It could be somebody who emerges during the course of the campaign. There are very many possibilities. But I think the key point here is that the DA has been open right from the beginning and upfront that this isn't a DA for president, John for president campaign. This is a campaign to rescue South Africa. And if standing aside to get somebody else who's better suited or more suitable to the job, we're willing to do that. But it must be a decision of the MPC to make. I think it's up to individual parties to choose winners and losers.
You know, Miss Zille has in the past spoken about a DA ANC coalition. Some within the ANC, especially the veterans of the ANC, feel that an ANC-DA coalition would bring the much-needed stability in the country. I think you yourself at some point spoke about an ANC, a reformed ANC that you could possibly work with. If you do not meet that threshold as the multi-party charter and you don't go over what is necessary for you to gain that majority, is this something that you could possibly look at?
Well, I think it's a very difficult question to answer because I don't know what the ANC will look like after the election. Our goal is to get the MPC over 51%, and that's all I'm focused on right now. If we don't succeed, the MPC must sit down and decide what the next play is. But I also don't know who's going to be sitting there. Does Mr. Ramaphosa survive being the first ANC president to lose their majority? Is he pushed out after the election? Is he held to account by the Mail and Guardian to go because the election result didn't go his way. And then who are you sitting across from? Paul Mashatile? Absolutely not. I won't do a deal with Paul Mashatile.
You will do a deal with President
No, I'm not saying
Ramaphosa.
I wouldn't say I'll do a deal with Ramaphosa, precisely for your intro there, that you said reformed ANC. He's shown anything but reform. It's the same scoundrels from the Zondo Commission on the ANC's lists, the same president protecting the speaker and protecting his deputy from accountability. There's no reform there. These are the same people, and that's a danger about just business may like it and some commentators may like it, but people must be very wary about what they ask for, because it was the same pressure that was put on the MDC to do a deal with ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe under this magical illusion that ZANU-PF would suddenly reform themselves. Well, they didn't, and in the process the MDC got destroyed. And ZANU-PF today is as rampant and as corrupt and as dangerous as they were under Mugabe. So just putting people together in a marriage convenience doesn't reform the one or the other. What I have said, though, is that we would like to prevent an ANC-EFF tie-up, because I'm concerned about what would happen to the country. I think there'd be disinvestment, I think there'd be capital flight, and I think international investors would find other emerging markets to take their business to, because they've seen this movie before in Venezuela and Zimbabwe. And we would do whatever we can to prevent that from taking place. But there are so many different permutations of different things that could happen between now and the 29th of May, and certainly between the 29th of May and the 14 days thereafter, that it's impossible to pin oneself to one scenario. But we will be open to making sure that we can do whatever we can to prevent a radical government getting into power and taking the country down the same path as Venezuela.
What I'm hearing from you, Mr. Steenhuisen, is that the door is not completely closed. It's slightly ajar, depending on what happens within the ANC and depending on what happens on the 29th.
What you're hearing me say is that my job is to get the multi-party charter over 51%, so I don't even have to have that debate. What I am saying is that the multi-party charter, if it's not able to get 51%, will have to sit down together and decide, how do we play the hand that the voters have dealt us in this election?
But even despite the multi-party charter,
and that would leave a number of options open. There's a GNU that's been spoken about. There's different models of running parliament and the executive. There's all sorts of permutations. But that's not a conversation before the election. That is a conversation to take place once the voters have played their hand and told us as the political parties, this is the results that we're giving you. Now it's up to you to play these hands and to make them work or otherwise. And we would have to then sit and discuss what the best way forward would be. And there's no options in an environment like that are off the table. Everything is on the table then, because those are the cards that have been dealt. But I maintain that if we work hard over the next couple of weeks and months, I believe we can get the multi-party charter over the line. I think there's enough energy and excitement and enough hunger for change in the country that people don't want to see the same old ANC sitting around the table making the same bad decisions that ended up plunging us into this crisis.
I asked this, Mr. Steenhuisen, because despite the multi-party charter, you as the DA need and I'm sure that you have your own strategies which you are busy working on. And I'm sure, because this conversation is not a conversation that has started today, it's a conversation that has been ongoing. I think Ms. Helen Ziller made these comments around 2019, and you spoke to the Sunday Times around 2021. So obviously, this is a conversation that has been ongoing within the party as to what happens in 2024. And I want to ask you then further, would a DA-ANC, do you believe that a DA-ANC coalition would bring about the stability that everyone seems to think that it would?
Well, let me just say this. The conversation started in 2019. I ended the conversation with my speech last year at the DA Congress, where I said very clearly, after I received an 84% majority vote mandate from the Congress, that our pathway forward is now to bring opposition parties together and to form 51%. Stability is not necessarily brought about just because two big parties come together. You've seen governments in other parts of the world where there's been coalitions between two big parties that spectacularly fall out. And so just the size of the two parties doesn't necessarily mean there's stability. And that's why it's so important in these conversations to not just talk about, well, do this, do that, you've got a majority. It's got to come down to values and principles, a common program of action, and a common idea about what you want to achieve over that 5-year period. And that's the basis upon which we enter into coalition agreements. It's not just, well, big party versus big party equals stability. There could well be, in an environment like that, where you have a bust-up over expropriation without compensation, nationalisation of the Reserve Bank, NHI. These are a number of things that would be red lines for the DA. And so just because you've got two bigger parties doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the inherent stability there. The stability will come from common values and principles and a common program of action and a common idea about what you want to achieve. That's what brings the stability, and an agreement then that's founded on those values, principles, and common programs.
You're not really answering my question though, sir, because I am asking, maybe I could frame it as a yes or no.
You're asking, you're trying to get me to say I'm going to work with the ANC. That's what you're trying to do.
No, not necessarily.
That's exactly what you're trying to do. And I'm saying to you, my first prize is to work with the multi-party charter to get it over the line. If that doesn't work, we will then have to decide on what the next best step is. It might be the least worst option to prevent the radicals in government from taking over, and that we would be willing to look at a variety of options then in order to achieve a result that we believe would be beneficial for South Africa's future. And that's as far as I can go on that. I can't say to you an ANC-DA government's going to happen. I can't say to you it's going to be stable, because I just don't know. I don't know what the ANC is going to look like after the election. I don't know whether they're going to become more radicalized as a result of the election or not. These are hypothetical questions. I can only deal with the cards I can see at the moment. The cards I see at the moment are a declining ANC below 50%, an opportunity for like-minded opposition parties, if they focus and work well together, to be able to bring a consolidated block of votes to the table that could just get a majority in the country. That's the cards I can see at the moment, and those are the cards I'm playing like my life depends on them.
I want to ask about succession plan with the DA, and if you find yourself in government, this is your second term, and perhaps maybe you could shed some light in terms of the constitution of the DA. This is your second term, you find yourself in government, you find yourself as the deputy president or even the president of the country. What then happens? Do you plan to still lead the party after 2026? What happens? And is there a two centers of power issue that becomes a problem for the DA?
Well, look, I mean, the DA will decide on its succession plan. The next Congress will be a year after this election. We have 3-year terms, and it'll be up to the party to choose its leader going forward. I would say that I don't think there's a problem with two centres of power. Helen Zille very ably led the party from the mayoralty in Cape Town and from the Premier's office in Cape Town. I don't think you have a problem with two centres of power, and I do think it would be important for the leader of the DA to be the face of the DA within a government, to be able to also make sure that you are delivering to your constituents and to the people that have voted for you, and being their representative in a potential government, so that they can see that you're there, that they've entrusted you with their vote, and you're out there making sure that you're doing the best job possible to ensure that the country succeeds and that they succeed.
I want to ask you about Mr. Bongani Baloyi, who's gone to the public protector, alleging that there was a slush fund which was used for your campaign. Has there been perhaps a reaction there, but also has there been an internal investigation around that?
There's no slush fund. There was never a slush fund. All of my campaign contributions and donations were declared absolutely in terms of the party's internal processes, and Mr. Dion George can affirm that again, as he has done relentlessly. Mr. Baloyi is looking for attention, and the only way he can find attention, because he's got nothing else to offer, is by trading off the fact that he used to be a DA member and coming up with all these conspiracies. So he's welcome to go to the public protector. I think she was very clear in the judgment in the CR17 matter that falls outside of her mandate, and she has got no opportunity. But Mr. Bloy is welcome to show me the day that these transactions were supposed to take place, the amounts, and I'm happy to open my bank accounts to show him that I've never received any of these monies. And I think it is absolutely outrageous what he is saying. And I'm waiting for the election to pass because I'm not going to give him the attention that he's definitely craving. But there will be litigation against him because he has defamed me. And I will be taking legal action against him. And when that truth comes out, I think there's some other things the public protector might be more interested in from the Midval days than in so-called fundraising.
Can you please shed some light?
No, I
to
won't
that?
shed light on it. I'm waiting for after the election because Mr. Bloy is wanting attention. I'm not going to give it to him.
But when you say there were some things to question around the Midval days, then surely then is it a party matter or is it a governance matter?
No, it's a governance matter, and I will raise
surely
it.
Then we have a right
I will
to know.
raise it at the appropriate time. I'm not going to give Mr. Bloy the attention he's demanding, but he will have some questions to answer himself over his conduct, seeing he has opened up these false allegations against me. I will start maybe telling the truth about some of the things that he got up to when he was the mayor of Midval.
For the longest time, Mr. Bongani Baloyi was the cream of the crop in terms of the DA's mayors. Why now come out saying that there is some questionable...
Because the information's only recently come to light. But I'm not prepared to get into a spitting match with Mr. Baloyi. He's not my focus. He is a side peripheral player. My focus in this election is getting the ANC out of power in Gauteng and the rest of the country, and that will be the focus. What happens after the election will be a matter for the public record at that time.
Very interesting, Mr. Steenhuisen. I want to, and I would love to hear a little bit more about what you're saying, given that you say that it's a governance matter. But I will ask you about the letter to the United States government. There's been a lot of criticism around the DA's letter to Mr. Blinken, as well as other the European Union and other governments in the West, and with the former president actually coming out to say that it was quite unusual for a political party to ask for assistance or missions to be brought in from the Western world. And in fact, it suggested that you wanted a particular voice or a particular observation by the West and by the so-called white countries. I'm not sure if you did hear that from the former president, but what was your reaction to that? And do you think that maybe that was the wrong call?
Not at all. And we actually learned the trick from the ANC themselves. Let me first of all say it didn't only go to Western countries and white countries. It went to the African Union as well as countries like Zambia and countries like Kenya who've just been through elections themselves. So it's a complete untruth that this was only sent to Western white countries. It was sent to democracies and democratic countries all over the world. The ANC in 1994, fearing that the National Party was going to use the entrenched position of state power and ownership of the machinery of state to manipulate the election, themselves made appeals for people around the world, governments, institutions, organizations, to come to South Africa to observe the election.
You're talking about 1994 versus now, Mr.
Yes,
Mr.
because
John
1994 was a crossroad election. 2024 is going to be a crossroad election.
1994 was, we could not say that 1994 we had an IEC which was independent, an IEC which was credible, an IEC which was world rated.
An IEC that leaked the lists of political parties, that failed at the first hurdle they had in this election, and leaked in a very, very considered and partisan way the lists of certain parties. That is not an organization that, I'm afraid, instills much confidence when at the very first hurdle they trip over it. This is a crossroads election. We have also seen from experience from Hakainde Hichilema and Kenya that when the incumbents, who have been so entrenched as the governing party, face the prospect of being removed, it helps to have international observers there to make sure that the election is free and fair for two reasons. One, if the opposition does win, you want that result to be credibly declared. If the government wins, and it's a narrow win, you also want the credibility to be declared. So in fact, the ANC should be welcoming this, because imagine if they, despite all the odds and despite all of the polling, cling on with 51%. Surely you'd want the international community to validate that result as quickly as possible.
Surely isn't
if
that
you've got nothing to hide, why don't you want eyes on the process?
But the IEC, it's the IEC's responsibility.
But I've just made the point.
But the IEC, I mean, in the past elections, we've had the AU come in as observers. We've had SADC come in as observers, and other countries as well.
Yes.
Why do you put it upon yourself to make that initiative? Why not let the IEC follow process?
Why not? The ANC invite Russia and China and other countries to intervene in South Africa all the time. Why can't we invite democracies from around the world? What are people so afraid of? What do you want to hide that you don't want eyes on the process? It's only when you want to steal an election that you react in this visceral way, when all you're having is more observers on the process. What is wrong with that? What is wrong with having international observation missions here? South Africa's parliament goes on observation missions all over the world to elections. To look at elections. What is wrong with that? The ANC themselves send delegations to go and observe elections. I've participated in a number of elections monitoring in Somaliland and Kenya and other places. There's nothing wrong with it. It is a healthy, normal practice, particularly in an election that is going to be so contested, and particularly with an IEC that we know has challenges. It has funding challenges. We've had problems in the past with the IEC. We've had vote tabulation problems with the IEC. 2 elections ago, all our votes at Benjamin Pyne Primary School were given to the ACDP. We only found out weeks after the election. We'd had proper simultaneous tabulation taking place. You could pick those anomalies up. The IEC is not perfect.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm not saying they're evil people. I'm not saying that they're malicious. But in an election that has been so heavily contested, I don't understand what the hoo-ha is about having more sets of independent eyes on the process to give the result more legitimacy.
Then do you have any sort of confidence in the credibility of the IEC, given what you've just been saying?
Yes, I do have confidence in the credibility, but as the saying goes, you trust but verify. And I think what you're wanting to do in this election is to verify that it's going to be a free, fair and open process, and that the ANC is not going to abuse the machinery of state after 30 years entrenchment to alter the election or to swing the election in their favour. And the best way to prevent that is to have as many eyes as possible on the process to prevent it from happening.
Mr. Steenhuisen, I want to ask you about this matter which I'm sure you hear about every now and again. We've also had conversations with you around your qualifications. People talking about that John Steenhuisen only has a matric. Some people saying that you're not qualified to lead this country given how limited your education is. Can you please just give us your view and just put the matter to bed?
Yes, I have a matric certificate. I studied at university. I never finished my degree. I studied politics and law. And nothing I learnt in politics had any bearing whatsoever on what politics is really about. Some of the greatest world leaders do not have degrees. Some of the greatest captains of industry do not have a degree. Winston Churchill didn't have a formal university qualification, yet he was one of the greatest political leaders in British history. We've had leaders here ourselves in South Africa who have no university degree. A university degree doesn't make you more honest. A university degree doesn't make you more able. Yes, it's a piece of paper, and I have huge respect for people who have got degrees and who go out to seek degrees. But in the modern world, degrees are becoming less and less of a requirement. And there's nothing that let me just tell you something. There's nothing I would have learnt in university that I haven't learnt over the last 23 years of being an activist, being a councillor, being a member of a provincial legislature, and being a member of parliament, a chief whip, and a leader of a political party, that could stand me in better stead to be able to lead here. Do you think that having master's degrees makes some of these politicians more honest? And you know what? I'd much rather say I don't have a degree, than to do what the latest trend seems to be and pretend you have one. I'm honest about who I am. I'm not ashamed about who I am. Judge me by my contribution and what I can achieve, and I think I can out-debate most people with doctorates and when it comes to politics.
Your relationship to polling, perhaps if you could just shed some light on your own polling, what your own polling suggests. I think I remember just a year ago, Ms. Zille saying that you do polling every other week. What does polling suggest in terms of...
We do polling every week, and we run the most comprehensive political poll in the country, if not the continent. What you're looking for in polling is the trend. And the trend over the last while, 2 years, has been a downward trend for the ANC and an upward trend for the opposition. I believe that we will comfortably beat the 2019 result, and that we will do very, very well in this election. And certainly our polls are showing us that is the direction. There have been some polls that have come out in the last week, the SRF, the Brenthurst poll, the Ipsos poll. We are comfortable with those polls. We don't agree with Ipsos's methodology, but certainly we're there and thereabouts with the Ipsos, with the Brenthurst and the SRF poll that has us in the mid-20s.
I'm going to go into the SRF and Brenthurst poll, but I want to touch on you saying comfortably. What does comfortably mean? Can you just give us some margins?
We will give a better result
obviously,
in the next election.
What margins are we talking about? Can you give us some numbers?
I can't give you a number this far out from an election, but certainly within 2 weeks of the election, we should be able to have a ballpark figure about where we'll end up. Remember, the campaign's just starting as well. Posters are only going up now. The real campaigning is starting, and we will continue to run that campaign. But I'm very, very happy about where we are at the moment, and I'm very happy that if the trend continues, we're heading for a good result in the election.
A lot of your detractors have spoken about the DA and its proximity to Brenthurst as well as the SRF. The SRF, for instance, is founded by a gentleman by the name of Johan van der Berg, who happens to be a chief researcher for the DA as well. Equally, he is the founder of Victory Research. And then you have Mr. Ryan Coetzee and Gareth van Onselen, who have some tentacles within the DA. Is it unfair then to say that these you have an influence in how these pollings are run?
Well, first of all, let me just say Mr. van den Berg is not the founder of the SRF. The SRF is headed by Frans Cronje and Saul Goldstein.
Founder of Victory Research, sorry.
No, he's a member. He's a partner of Victory Research. He's not the owner of Victory Research.
It says right here he is the founder and managing partner of Victory Research.
That's not my understanding.
It's right on their site, sir.
Okay. Well, he works for the DA and does our polling. He obviously contracts out because the specialist skills that are required there are used across the board. But I would just say this. What would the point be of putting out a rubbish poll that would damage your credibility to the point when after an election people say, but you were so far out, this is ridiculous. And that's exactly what's happened to places like Ipsos, which is why they've been downgraded to B negative because of the unreliability of their polling. You'd be a pretty short-sighted polling company owner to massage and put out rubbish polls that are subsequently disproved and that you know are not true, because it damages your credibility. And in that industry, your reputation is all you have. And so, organizations like Sabi Strategy and Victory Research and Ipsos and Mark Data rise and fall on the accuracy of their polling. So it would make no sense for them to say, oh, well, we like the DA, so we're going to give them a much higher percentage. It also creates expectations in that if they're not met, can also be equally damaging. So I think that it's a bit of an area that I think a lot of noise and scene has been made of unnecessary. The polls are the polls. They will continue to come out, and they will change as the election campaign unfolds. And those companies will be judged at the end of the day based on their research. I can't answer for those companies. We do our own in-house polling, and we have our own polling unit. Johan consults to our polling unit, and we do telephonic calls, we do face-to-face interviews, we do focus groups on a weekly basis, and that feeds into our own in-house polling system, which has allowed us to call a number of the elections to well within the margin of error. And I'm very proud of that capability because it helps us to be able to understand what issues South Africans care about and what their views and opinions are about your solutions and what you're putting on the table. And I don't think any modern political party can survive without having some polling capability going forward.
I completely understand what you're saying. I was just talking about the conflict. Isn't it conflicting to have someone who is an independent pollster, but equally working for the DA and feeding the public exactly what...
but I think it depends on whether that person's working on a specific project at the time. Many of these companies, and I say I don't work for any of them, so the questions are better directed to Victory Research, the SRF, and Sabi and Mark Data and those companies. It's better to ask them that. I don't know what they have in their companies to insulate any potential conflict of interest, but I imagine they would be pretty short-sighted if there was any hint that they were manipulating polls to favour a certain outcome. Victory's done polling for other people in the past that have had the DA much lower than we felt we were at, and you live with it. It's a feature of politics, and so polling is useful, but again, a poll on a specific day is a snapshot. What you want to be able to see is the movie, and the movie is the trend. And certainly when I look at the trend, aggregated trend of all of the polls put together, average them out, the trend is downwards for the ANC, it's upwards for the DA, and I'm very happy about that.
What does the country's relationship look like on the BRICS formation under a DA government?
Well, we'd have to see what the benefit is for us out of BRICS. I think we had already taken a party resolution at our last Congress that we would support staying in BRICS, but that was its previous incarnation. Adding countries like Iran into the mix now, who do not share our values and principles, who run a theocracy, and where the rights of women are so severely restricted, I don't think is necessarily in South Africa's best interest. I also think we need to be far more pragmatic and less ideological about our approach to foreign affairs. I think that the Cold War is over, and we need to forget about those days and those ideologies and focus on what's in our national best interest. Where can we get the best trade? And I don't think you need to have an either-or approach. I think you can have an and. And India is a very good example of a country that has an and. They've got relationships with Russia, but they've also got relationships with the West. They've got a relationship with China, but they've also got relationships with places in the Middle East. And it's all done pragmatically on what's better for India. What I don't think we should be doing, however, is poking sticks into the eyes of our trading partners. 75% of our foreign direct investment coming into South Africa comes from the US, UK, and the European Union. 6% comes from China and Russia combined. We have bilateral trade agreements with the UK and the EU, very favorable for South African products. We have a unilateral trade agreement called AGOA with the US, which gives us very good preferential access to their markets. We don't have a single bilateral trade agreement with any BRICS country. We don't get any preferential access there, and we compete with countries within BRICS for strategic minerals and the sale of strategic minerals and the like. So I don't think that we should be playing a tit-for-tat game. I think if there's financial interest for South Africa to be gained from looking to the global south for investment and opportunity, we must do that because we want business and we want trade and we want markets open to South African goods. But it shouldn't become a zero-sum either-or game. It should be an and. How do we expand the amount of world trade that we're getting? So it does make me uncomfortable about Iran, And I think we would probably have to look very, very carefully at that arrangement, because I don't think you can be in a group of countries that are not sharing your democratic values, at least free and fair elections, the rights of women, the rights of the LGBTQI plus community, the rights of the political rights of the opposition that are not defended. You've got to carry those values abroad as well. But I think we do need to reassess on a far more pragmatic way what's in South Africa's best interest. How do we attract investment? How do we bring jobs here? And how do we open up access for more South African goods on international markets?
Just lastly, our relationship with Zimbabwe. What do you foresee in terms of that relationship?
I think we need to take a much tougher line with Mnangagwa. I think we should be pressurizing him more on human rights and freedom in Zimbabwe, particularly the political rights of the opposition there. I think that the brutal way in which he deals with political opponents is not something we should be turning a blind eye to, given the fact that the negative impacts in his country does impact on South Africa. I think it was wrong for the president to be one of the only African leaders to go to Mnangagwa's inauguration when the rest of the African Union leaders were sending a message saying we're unhappy about what's happening in your country. So we would adopt a friendly but firm approach to Zimbabwe, and certainly be putting a lot more pressure on them to open up the democratic space and to stop the oppression and to start allowing the people of Zimbabwe to be put first, not the politicians.
When it comes to state-owned entities, your manifesto refers to a balanced approach to privatization. What does that entail, and what is your thoughts on the government's current approach to SOE privatization?
Well, the government's moving way too slowly and not credibly. So, for instance, the public-private partnership with rail, the government must get real. No company or private entity is going to invest money that's required for 30 years of infrastructure and then settle off for a 3-year concession. You've got to get realistic. If you're going to do a public-private partnership, you need to do it over a 15, 20, 25, 30-year time frame. So it allows the person putting in the infrastructure to benefit over the long term. No one's going to put in the huge capital outlay on the infrastructure for a 3-year concession that could be taken away. Madness. So you'd need to do it in a far more structured way. What we're saying is that for many of these state-owned enterprises, just allowing complete privatization might not be the best option, and that we could be looking for public-private partnerships, 49-51%, where the government controls or has controls some of the stake in it, but brings in the private sector to assist with capital injection, with perhaps governance and expertise, and makes it easier for them, that SOE then to run and raise capital on foreign markets. A very good example was when I was in Somaliland. They've got a port at Berbera, which I think is going to be one of the most strategic ports on the east coast of Africa. And it used to be completely government run, inefficient, ineffective, old, aging infrastructure. They signed a 49-51% partnership with Dubai Ports World. Berbera is now one of the most bustling ports on the east coast. It's a massive multi-billion-dollar investment there. It's efficient, it's effective, it's growing, it's attracting a lot of attention, with other countries now wanting to use the port. And I think it's a very good example about how you can leverage a public-private partnership. But it is going to mean that government lets go. This government just doesn't want to let go. It talks about public-private partnerships, but when it comes down to brass tacks, it just can't let go. It just wants to let it carry on with the government in control. And we've seen what happens. It's how you end up with an airline that doesn't fly, a state-owned mine that doesn't mine, a state-owned arms manufacturer that can't manufacture arms, a state-owned electricity producer that cannot produce electricity. There's some things government should do and should focus on doing them well. Where it can't, it should get out of the way and allow the private sector in to help.
Well, thank you so much, Mr.
Thank
John
you.
Steenhuisen. Just one last word. 2026 comes, will you be running for a party leader?
Well, it'll be 2025 will be the Congress.
Oh, 2025.
25, yeah. It's a year after the election, so we'll see. I mean, a week is a long time in politics, so we'll have to see how this election goes. But I'm certainly not going anywhere soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.